Hello and welcome to my channel, Peering Soul. You have come across my little compendium of strange, dark fantasies conjured by my mind and penned by my hands. On this channel, I'll be sharing and talking about my drawings, most of which are in what I'm calling my digital sketchbook. It is a collection of concepts for one of many worlds I'm designing, each with their own flavors of fantasy and sights to behold. The one I'll be sharing first is for a project called Dungeon of the Wanton, one of my most dark and depraved worlds, though it is all confined in one section of a bigger realm. The world at large is what some would consider tame or ordinary high fantasy, featuring similar ideas of magic, adventure, non-human races, and world design. Elves, dwarves, orcs, and other Dungeons and Dragons-esque things are present as well. There is a set logic to this world, one where any can happily place themselves into and experience what it has to offer with little stakes. That is except for just one little piece of this realm, nestled into a serene clearing within a lush, temperate forest. A stone tower, ruined and overgrown, lying still under silken rays bled through the clouds. Inside, one's eyes are met with a mound of odd-shaped rock in the tower's center, along with an inscription on the back wall written in a language utterly unknown to all else in the world. Even with deciphering magic, the text remains unintelligible. When inspecting the rock mound closely, it reveals to be a tangled, packed mass of human bodies, petrified like statues. It was revealed that this mound could be moved, though it took the combined effort of a dozen of the strongest Oni, Minotaurs, and Wildermen the guild could find to push it aside just enough to reveal what it was covering. A stone staircase leading down into darkness. A darkness which makes even those one with hellish forces shudder at its lightless cold. One must ponder, to what extent would drive some unknown people to petrify themselves into a large, impossibly heavy mound of rock over a simple, narrow staircase in the middle of an unremarkable corner of the world? The answer unfolds, but only to one. A low-rank, novice adventurer who tagged along by chance with a group of highly skilled guild members to investigate what lies under the tower. They approached the inscriptions, and to their eyes the text unraveled itself, revealing the purpose the guild was looking for. Stay away, all of the realms above who enter this place. We have sacrificed the last of ourselves to keep the dark from leaking out. Our homes are gone. We lost the fruitless battle. Darkness despairs our land, perverting it into something most profane. We beg of all who come here, please turn away. Staunch your curiosity. Suppress your virtue. Hide away your heart's fluttering embers. It is what they desire. Let our realms beneath be forgotten, for the sake of all good which remains in your realms above. Our deliverance remains in legend. Even with this revelation, they were not listened to. Taking steps, one by one, down into the dark unknown, the imagination is all that can give any an idea of what may be at its bottom. And then, to the despair of the nameless people We went to such lengths to seal the entrance. The horrors below reveal themselves to the realms above. Alright, now onto the real meat of this whole digital sketchbook tour. The way this works is simple, in that each page has a bunch of sketches on various topics and ideas in varying levels of clarity, I'll call it. It is essentially how rough or clean the drawing and concept is itself. So, expect drawings that are fairly clear to read, I think, and some that are like, what the hell is this even supposed to be? I think as I show you these pages, you can sort of get what my favorite subject is. And that is, of course, monsters. If I had to market myself, I would say that I am a monster designer first and foremost, and everything else a hard second, or third, or fourth, whatever. To give extra context, Dungeon of the Wanton is one of my many game mock-ups that can be quickly described as a first-person dungeon crawler with a heavy emphasis on horror, depravity, and the gradual loss of self as the player character continues to descend this nightmarish underground world. They progress down through the 7 layers of this dungeon, each having their own themes and flavors of depraved practices. And within each layer are 4 regions, so to speak, which the player character will need to explore to move on to the next layer. These layers are additionally called chapters. I subconsciously borrowed the premise from Dante's Inferno, and I only realized that I did until much later, after I had completed it about a year ago now. Actually, no, 2 years by this recording. It's a common theme throughout my works, as you'll see. I will discuss more of what this world has to offer, but for my first video's sake, I will refrain from dumping absolutely everything here. Going back, yes, I did say I completed Dungeon of the Wanton, in that I finished all 7 chapters and drew every enemy and boss you face, all 200 plus of them in total, which took about all of 2023 to complete. But as I was entering summer of 2024, my feelings changed. I had begun designing other worlds, one of which, to me, felt like the superior to Dungeon of the One in almost every facet, even though it came before Dungeon of the One in the timeline I made for each mock-up thing. Dungeon of the One felt outdated, even though I finished it just 6-ish months ago at that period, and I was tempted to just scrap every bit of content it offered and keep it as but a failed experiment, even though I loved some of the ideas and monsters that came up for it. As July was coming to an end, I at last decided what I was going to do with Dungeon of the Wanton, thanks to the input of my peers as I was in my last semester of college. I decided to revamp the project, reimagining each chapter and breathing new life into them, which before, even when I freshly completed the world, felt bland and barren for what the project scale was. I was going to expand the level of depravity which the project was defined by, showing how vile the dark is, to the point where you can feel it in your bones. Its evil reflected in the environments and enemies. Additionally, I was going to draw remakes of old monsters as well as add in lots more, all digitally since the legacy ones were done in a physical sketchbook. For the enemies I'm reimagining, I will show a photo of the old version to compare how my design philosophy and technical skill has changed over the course of 2024. Okay, I've rambled for long enough. Let's get into the first page of my digital sketchbook. The sketches here are for the first chapter, which centers around the perversion of death and the horrible rot which comes from it, spawning wretched insects and other grotesque creatures from the decay. Each of the chapters has a god which rules it, their influence shaping the locations and enemies within. And for Chapter 1, the unsightly god Kynox has spread its foul vision of death across what was once the holy capital of the realms beneath. They revered the true and divine death, symbolized by white silken veils, grey light, and wolves. Death's agents who hunted after those on death's doors indiscriminately. But Kynox has despoiled the capital's glory, infesting the living and feasting on the hallowed dead, making a mockery of their worship. To reflect that, the enemies of Chapter 1 are going to be even more foul than they were in the Legacy version, leaning into decay, despoilment, and the blending between man and insect. The designs for Kynox-aligned beings must be gross and wretched, and not have any hints of refinement or regality, which I leaned into a bit too much for some designs in the Legacy version. Some of the reoccurring designs of Kynox's influence are dark, wiry hairs tangled in corpses and a long architecture, worm-like pests which burrow into bones, aptly named bone hairs, flies and other carcass-eating insects, and black nails which, when pierced into flesh or stone, spread Kynox's taint. Starting simple, this is a rough sketch of a grub popping out of some large cyst on the ground. I imagined it erratically wriggling its way out in this half cocoon-like form. And what it became once it escaped the cyst, I don't know. As when I was halfway through it, I was not feeling the design, and so I left it in the state seen. In the future, I will revisit this idea with something much nastier and, ultimately, cooler. This is a skeleton which has been infested by the previously mentioned bone hairs, thin worm pests which burrow into bones to feast on the marrow, and while they're eating, the back ends of them stick out, resembling wiry hairs lining the victim's bones. They erupt as seen from the ribcage, where at the tip is a spirit stone held in their grasp. What a spirit stone is, I will detail later. I exaggerated the bend of the limbs and neck to emphasize the aggression of the bone hairs as they burrow into every surface and consume what was once a departed body given proper burial. Here is a reimagined enemy called the Shining Fly, which in the Legacy was called the Mimic Fly. As you can see, the Shining Fly's design differs greatly from the Mimic's due to a singular issue I had. The concept was that items in Dungeon of the One would shine a gray light in the distance, and the Mimic Fly would, mimic that light to lure players into rooms which, when entered, would trigger a trap or ambush as the fly buzzed off. The problem was that the fly's design would never be seen, as it would be a simple ball of light that moved, and so I felt that the fly's weird design was wasted. To fix that, in my mind, I chose to dial it back and make it look like a normal fly whose shell shined a bright silver. Thus, the function remained and the design didn't feel wasted. Will my heart change on this? Maybe, but for now it shall suffice. Since Kynox's vision of death was a mockery of the capital's worship of divine death, why not have it so inside the conquered capital the spawn of Kynox would play in the skin of the people who practice the worship of divine death? Deacons, priests, and other ranks of the church have been killed and their skin flayed, worn by insects who mock divine death worship. This is a sketch of that. A deacon whose flayed head is worn by a bizarre bug, its face poking out of his mouth. When entering combat, the bug would take off this mask and disrobe, revealing its true body and flying around while still clutching onto the robes in Deacon's head. I don't know what the priests and other church members will look like, but they for sure will be even stranger. Since the theme of Kynox's vision of death is the blending between man and insect, I thought, why not go even further with this idea? Since in the Legacy, there were only a few enemies which were like this. So here, this is a large variety of this enemy type. And since they were originally human, it has 4 limbs, not 6. A long, sharp proboscis pokes out of its mouth, which it uses to suck up blood and other vile fluids in the region it's found in, the fetid tomb. Its eyes, large and bulging, bearing traces of its former humanity with its faint irises. In the back, it has a stinger of sorts, which I imagine it would use to inject the player with poison, but only if they're behind it, since it lacks any flexibility. Another symbol of Kynox's taint is the pestilence, which are these circular invertebrate adjacent beings spawned from the concentrated rot which a black nail creates when stabbed into flesh or stone. They naturally emit a vapor of taint, which infects any living beings that come too close. Often, they are seen emerging from parts of creatures that have either been stabbed by a black nail or, rarely, were born entirely from taint. The pestilence I sketched is a massive variety that emerges from taint sludge found in a deep, hidden, and claustrophobic layer of the fetid tomb. They swim through the air in a cloud of rotten vapor, with just being in its vicinity dangerous. Since there are 7 gods presiding over each of the chapters, I thought, why would they not create emissaries of sorts? I had previously made one for the god of chapter 3, but not for the rest. So, here, I made a rough sketch of what Kynox's emissary could be. Though I will not be using this design, as I sort of winged it and didn't really think of how its design correlated directly to Kynox. Each emissary must have the essential symbols of their god, and this didn't have what I would think Kynox's would. One part of the sketch I do like is the spherical bug thing erupting out of the skull, which I will either bring over to the emissary's final design or put it in some other enemy. Here is another reimagined enemy, called the Fly Cloud. It is, as the name implies, a cloud of flies, which hovers around the dark halls it's found in, swarming over the player and eating them alive with countless tiny mouths. The flies must come from somewhere, I thought. So, as you can see in the Legacy, that source was a human skull, held aloft by the flies. But to me, it felt unsatisfactory for a while, and so I went weirder with it, making it a spiky core of black hairs, which the flies endlessly spawn from. In this way, the concept remains the same, but the core, which the flies come from, is different. While sketching, I thought, what if fly tape was an enemy? And so, that's where this concept came from. A gangly arm coming out of the wall, with the fingertips sprouting a wiry line of dark hair. In them, the tangled remains of flies. The strange face which the arm comes from was added later, because I thought it looked neat. The black nail stabbed through the palm was similarly added later. This monster may make it in some shape, but I feel like I could do more with the original premise. Fly tape as an enemy. I can imagine one of those veils which are hung over cradles to be similar to the sketch, or perhaps just straight up the sentient fly tape with corpses intermingled on it. The possibilities are almost endless, and I will explore it on my own time. A strange idea I had for an enemy was an ethereal ring of flies which hovered over other enemies, blessing them with Kynox's dark divinity. And so I sketched this, the halo of flies, which, while it doesn't bless other enemies, does, when left alone, summon a ghostly manifestation of taint. The apparition cannot be harmed, and so destroying the halo is the only way to banish it. I quite like the design, and the whole foul spirit concept sort of came from this, as you will see later. While revisiting the regions of Chapter 1, the one I knew needed the biggest rework was the first region, the rust-stained halls. Before, there was really nothing special to say about it. It was merely the introduction to the dungeon, not meant to be anything crazy or memorable. That's boring. So in my reimagining, I thought, why not have the rust-stained halls be brimming with plague, along with another concept, but that will be detailed later. To symbolize this disease, rats will be its unwilling host, spread onto them via parasites and black nails. This rough sketch is of a blend between the two, where a giant rat's head and front limbs have been removed, with black nails stamped into the stumps, spreading the taint deep into its bowels. The tip of its tail has additionally transformed into a pestilence. Bedbug-like pests crawl over its body, feasting on its tainted blood. This design won't go into the final, and it was more of an experiment of a new idea. Continuing with the rats, this is a sketch of what I call a mad rat, which is a, air quotes, common enemy of sorts in the rust-stained halls, notable for its aggression and bearing of a giant bedbug-like pest on its back. The parasite's beak pierces directly into the spinal column, which causes the rat to go, well, mad. I imagine the pest to burst with blood if struck, ridding the rat of its parasite, but ultimately killing it in the process. A reimagined enemy bearing the same name, called the Rat Puppet. The original idea I had for it was a rather dog-looking rat that has been strangled to death by its own tail and puppeteered by an unseen specter. I imagined it to hover around and move towards the player in an eerie spiral-like motion. And once killed, the rat's head would fall off. For the remake, I kept the core idea, but changed the rat's design to look like a rat and show that it was a victim of the dark spirit, who is the true enemy. The rat has been strangled with such violence that its head is just barely hanging on, and I wanted the spirit, which you can faintly see just behind it, to look wicked. And when you destroy its puppet, the spirit simply lets go of the carcass, giggles, and fades away. Yet another remade enemy, this one called the Decayed Guardian. The idea behind it is that they were people of the capital who, once they died, were placed within iron statues armed with swords to act as spiritual guards to any dark forces which attempted to breach the gate to the realms beneath proper. But, of course, that didn't work. And so the Guardians roam the rust-stained halls, their duty mired from Kynox's influence, unable to distinguish between abominations and man. And so they attack anything they come across, save other Guardians. Brimming with rust and pieces of the statue's shell fallen off, revealing the cadaver beneath, they are a shadow of their former selves. Additionally, the exposed bits are the only way to damage the Guardians, and hitting the iron shell will only cause your weapon to bounce off. For the remake, I made rough sketches of potential variants that you could find, as having just one is too boring for me, though it is more work. Not much is different between both versions, except the sword, which I made jagged and almost falling apart. While the capital has long been conquered, there are certain corners that, despite the odds, have remained untouched by Kynox's taint. Special cemeteries made to lay royalty, holy figures, and ordinary folk, blessed by divinity to rest, kept safe via wards infused with powerful holy energy. The dark are powerless before true holiness, and so Kynox and its wretches are unable to enter these places. Within the largest of these cemeteries lies what is called a Saint Stele, which is a large white stone monument made to commemorate 4 saints of the church. Depicted on the front is the first of the saints, possessing the signature halo of the faith and accompanied by a wolf on each side. The text at the top reads, "Let the hunt take me, my bones in its maw, my soul in its gullet. Only then will I be holy." On the back is an image of the silk bud, the most sacred of all symbols for divine death. Ordinarily, this stele and the cemetery at large would stay untouched no matter how long time passed. But you, by accident, broke the wards, allowing a loathsome creature called the Desecrator to enter and defiled the hallowed dead. Chasing it down, fighting the infested departed along the way, you corner it by the stele, but in its wickedness pierces the top of the monument and infests it completely, bringing it to life as a giant abomination bursting with pests from within. It would be a mini-boss type, slashing its claws and thrusting its needle-like proboscis at you, as well as sending out dark magic projectiles from the 4 black flies, which poke their heads out of the stele's niches. And these flies, additionally, are sort of the remains of the saints kept within the monument, tainted and sort of reanimated as half man, half insect creatures. Have you ever picked out a sink drain plug before, seen it was covered in mold, and was in the process of cleaning it all off, and thought to yourself, what if this was alive? Alive in a vaguely animal way. That's how I got this concept. Going back to the hidden layer of the fetid tomb, where the floor is flooded in taint sludge, I got an idea where in order to clear off the sludge and make certain areas accessible, you need to locate and remove these large plugs from the ground or walls to drain it out. But once you did, and you stand over the filthy, slimy plug, from the pipes, these big clumps of different colored mold pool out, and after a brief time, they spring to life. These are 3 variants of living mold, with the left being tall and bearing an eye-like bulb at its top, which it can use to cast gross mold spells. The right is somewhat human-shaped, and can whip at or pull you close with its extendable arms. The bottom is small and weak, though capable of leaping some distance towards you, and is also a swarmed-based enemy. Returning to the rust-stained halls, the second concept explored is that, while there is prevalent defilement of the body by Kynox's taint, why not have the soul, too, become tainted? This is my first sketch of that idea, where an orb of pestilence rested within a skull locks away a person's corrupted soul. And when the player is within its vicinity, it's released to attack them. Defeating the fouled spirit only causes it to return to the orb until it regains strength, and so destroying the core will put it out of commission permanently. The idea I am sticking with, but the core's design, I'm not, as in its place I am using tainted spirit stones. Again, spirit stones will be detailed later in this video. A break from all the monster designs, here is a sketch for one of many weapons you can discover called the Fly Flail. The weapon's head is modeled after the red flies, pictured here, whose design I'm keeping because, well, I still like it. It is a secret weapon found behind a destructible wall in the 4th region, additionally locked within a treasure chest. When opened, if one's observant, they will see the skeletal remains of what appears to be a child. The weapon's special ability is that it can spawn an allied red fly after a charged heavy attack. But once this is done, the player cannot attack again for about 5 seconds, due to the fly head needing to reform. Another weapon, this one a sacred, one-by-trial armament called the Pale Spiral. With twin silk veils tied just above the pommel and crafted from white stone. It is brimming with divine death energy, and thus adept at slaying specters, undead, and Kynox-aligned beings. To acquire it, you must first locate it within the Black Reservoir, which lies below a great cliff east of the capital's central castle. Inside a ruined gazebo of sorts, its sharp tip poking out of the ground, the player must slowly pull it out in order to wield it. However, pulling it out causes your life to gradually drain away, and so managing your health and life recovery items is essential to adding the Pale Spiral to your arsenal. Continuing on with more of Chapter 1, this page is where I start to get comfortable with the digital sketchbook style, and thus I get crazier with my designs for the reimagined chapter of Defiled Death. Beginning with a pair of foul bugs are the Dross Eater Beetle and the Blightfly, both of which are remakes. These insects appeared in a special section of the Fete Tomb, where the player must transport the last pure departed, who is hidden away to the door which leads out of the tomb, as it can only be opened when an untainted cadaver lies under the gray ray of light in front of it. But the body's presence attracts the many wretched creatures of the tomb, swarming through the corridors to viciously feast on the pure flesh. The beetle would appear in groups and emerge from scum on the walls and floor, mostly ignoring the player as it made its way to its meal. The fly would mostly appear alone, being quite large and having the ability of spreading disease to the player with its bite. In the Legacy, the beetle was called the Beetle of the Horrid Decay, which was a bit much for what the enemy was to me. Changing the lanky limbs and face was for the best, as at that time it just didn't look right, and not in an intentional way. For the Blightfly, giving it an eye pattern on its wings made it more interesting for me. And in the Legacy, the antennae poking out of the eyes wasn't as clear as I wanted it to be, and so I attempted to make it more obvious here. I'm pretty satisfied with how they turned out. However, there is one last Purest Corpse Legacy enemy, which I need to reimagine, but that will come in my own time. These are two sketches for the same concept. A weird, buggish creature that spawns after a parasitic attack from a different enemy. The left sketch is rough, and I gave it up on it pretty quickly, as it wasn't landing the idea I had at all. I was thinking that the head would be a sort of mimicry of the player character's chosen race, but be they either human, elf, orc, minotaur, or whatever, and it would follow you around like a child, but its presence would only bring bad luck. I'm thinking of reusing this concept for a different enemy in another chapter, but for chapter 1, I'm not going to use it. The right sketch is for the heart spawn, which is the final design of this idea, a rather small, parasitic-born creature that scuttles about and spits dark, slimy balls at the player while keeping a distance, as it's very fragile. Perhaps when killed, it will take a chunk out of the player's own health, since it came to being from their heart. A concept that popped into my head is that, since the black nails are so prevalent in spreading Kynox's taint, why wouldn't there be creatures that imitated the nails? And so, that's where this enemy came from. A tubular fly with a spear-like stinger that impales itself into humans and keeps them semi-alive in a parasitic relationship. I like how this one came out, as the visual of a weird bug stabbed into the head of an unfortunate victim, piloting it to attack other humans is cool, at least to me. Additionally, this is the enemy whose certain attack can cause the creation of a heart spawn, shown here. The nose growth would detach and fly over to the player, and if hit, would pierce their chest and inject black hairs into and around their heart, the taint sapping their essence, allowing a heart spawn to come to be. Next is a reimagined enemy called the Carcass Mound, appearing in the fetid tomb as a stationary hazard that passively spreads disease fluid in a large radius around it. The legacy and remake are pretty similar, the difference being that the remake is more clear to read, I feel. But the biggest change is that the remade Carcass Mound has a rare chance of, upon death, splitting open, revealing a yellow gelatin cocoon underneath that, if not destroyed in time, will spawn a formidable foe in the hidden, taint-flooded lair of the tomb. That foe being this monster here, the perfect rot child. A mini-boss type, these enemies are pretty strong and have lots of tricks up their rotten, buggy sleeves. I love the way this one turned out. And it came to be not from the cocoon silhouette from the Carcass Mound, but instead the little black-eyed cadaver at the base of the mound, as shown there. I thought, why not have it so, on a rare chance, that cadaver would attempt to reincarnate itself in a way after the mound was destroyed. And so the perfect Rothschild came to be. What makes it perfect, air quotes, is that it is a being purely born from Kynox's taint, as most enemies are either depraved insects or defiled humans. A creature brought into being via decay is a rare and sacred thing indeed to the forces of Kynox. A black nail lies under both toes, whatever you call it, and so just crawling around spreads taint. If you recall, the tainted rat concept from the first page, I put that concept's idea of a pestilence growing out of the tail for the Rothschild, cementing it further as a blessed monstrosity. Here is a more environmental drawing, that of a mangled, brutalized human corpse found among other broken bodies in chambers in the rust-stained halls. These are victims of a depraved practice, one which I alluded to in the first page, where I talked about how the soul would potentially be defiled just like the body. In order to remove the soul, and thus taint it, the person's spirit stone must be excised. The worshippers of divine death did this by carefully cutting open the chest and removing the stone with utmost grace and respect, taking the stone to spirit it away to the divine realm in their sacred rituals. But the forces of Kynox, of course, have no such respect. And thus, what you see here is their method of obtaining spirit stones. Pulverizing the body, leaving them a broken husk, yet still alive, their chests are ripped open, and their spirit stones are torn out in the most violent way imaginable. and only then do they die. But of course, they are not departed, as their souls are captive to the dark, ensuring their torment beyond death. A most vile practice indeed. What being exactly removes the spirit stones, I haven't thought of yet, but whatever they are, they're not going to be the nicest looking fellows. Here is at last a detailed look at a spirit stone's design. At the base is an image of the person's soul, resting on top of silken sheets while under the sun of the divine realm. Spirit stones naturally give off a silvery light, and physically resides within a person's chest, sort of like a shirakodama from old Japanese beliefs. Below is what a spirit stone that has been tainted looks like. The silvery light vanished and replaced by a dark halo. The once pure soul at the base has been utterly defiled, becoming the host of nightmarish parasites while under a black sun of rotten eggs. These tainted spirit stones would be hidden away somewhere while the enslaved soul manifests and attacks the player, and only by destroying these stones can the captive soul at last be free. What a fouled spirit would look like, I explore here, bearing a similar head design and being shrouded in a dark halo. The face is perpetually in agony, and a large black nail is partially stabbed into its chest, meant to symbolize it being a prisoner to Kynox's taint. I don't know why I didn't carry over the bulbous stomach from the corrupted spirit stone design, as that was, to me, my favorite part of the sketch. Perhaps some other variant of fouled spirit will have that. This is a reimagining of one variety of enemy type called the bristlehosts, which are the most common kind of reanimated dead, controlled by Kynox's black, wiry hairs. Completely skeletal, they retain no humanity and are purely dispensable puppets used to kill the living, making their despoilment easier for Kynox's pests. The normal legacy variant, as you can see here, had the core idea, but it had a glaring problem. That pelvis. What even is that? It's like a flat figure eight or something. I don't know why I chose to make the pelvis like this, and the worst part is I kept it like this for every other skeleton design up until the last boss of Dungeon of the One, where then I finally decided to look at a reference. I'm glad I fixed that. One other problem with the legacy, which you can also see with this variant, called the Bristlehost Warrior, was that they are too refined. They aren't as decayed as they should be, and their upright posture suggests lingering intelligence. But they are puppets, and so their poses should be hunched and unnatural, to show that they are not in control of their bodies. That is what I set out for this sketch, the Bristlehost Knight, found patrolling the streets and castle of the capital, wielding either a longsword or a halberd. They have traces of their armor, but is ultimately ruined, and a detail that I'd like to push forward would be the flies growing out of the hairs which pilot it. It's a step in the right direction, with making the common enemy type more than forgettable fodder. Returning to the Rustine Halls, this is a concept of a rat choir that sings hymns in certain parts of the region. The little scepter and scripture it holds, along with a black halo behind its head, is to make it look holy, but in a sort of profane way. The sickly flesh and boils help that, definitely. The hymn itself is for the Rat Prince, who spreads its blessings to other rat enemies who are in the hymn's vicinity. If a lot of the rat choir are killed, it may invoke the ire of that prince. And this is the Rat Prince itself, which manifests as an apparition surrounded by a rotten halo that pursues the player in certain locations. It specializes in poisoning the player with its sword, as well as casting various plague spells from the brass goblin in its hand. The foul fluid contained within, capable of conjuring fleas, the source of the rust-stained hall's prevalence and contagions. The super long tail coming from the banded ball growth was a detail from the prince's silhouette in the rat choir song that I knew I had to carry over, and I think it makes it look more delightfully strange. This, along with the perfect Rothschild, is a design which I'm happy with how it turned out, as it helps in the revamp's goal in breathing new life into each of the regions you explore so deeply in each chapter. A rough sketch of the gazebo that the Pale Spiral is found in, watched over by little wolf statues as a way to ward off dark spirits. This gazebo is in the center of the previously mentioned Black Reservoir, which is largely empty yet massive in scale, with the only things populating it being the Hunt Keepers, which are mini-bosses, and special spirits, which I will talk about in a bit. Here is a concept for a wolf skull bearing what is called a kingstone between its maw, along with resting on silken sheets that flow in a non-existent breeze. A kingstone is a special spirit stone held within certain people who are chosen for lordship, with some becoming great rulers, while others simply remaining ordinary and going about their lives without knowing of their blessing. Those types of kingstone bearers are rested within wolf skulls, as it is believed that only a consecrated wolf can spirit away these souls to the divine realm. Currently, 4 of these kingstones are guarded by Hunt Keepers, which you can see here. Each are mini-boss types, and will put up a vicious fight to protect what they were appointed to keep safe long ago. On death, they will drop their respective kingstone. When all 4 have been collected, a door on the far northeast side of the Black Reservoir can then be unlocked. What lies on the door's other side is this glass container for the Silk Bud Key, an ancient treasure of the capital, whose bit is formed entirely of silk veils, thus can only be used on a lock of spiritual origin. What exactly the Silk Bud is, and what lock it's used for, I will reveal whenever I return to Dungeon Level 1, which will not be for some time. If you notice on the top of the container, there is a small image of a wolf clamping its jaws on a person's head. That is to symbolize the impassionate, predatory nature of the hunt. Speaking of the hunt, this is a concept for a spirit of the hunt, which would appear in the Black Reservoir along with the Hunt Keepers. However, I'm not using this design, as while the almost serpentine open-maw wolf apparition is cool, the skeletal spirit itself is not my favorite. I didn't have a solid idea for what I wanted it to look like, and so I just drew a vague skull wrapped in silk veils, but it still didn't land. For more fleshed out sketches, I want it to be less of an enemy, as depicted here, and more as environmental decor to give the player a glimpse into the hunt. So far, I have talked about 3 of Chapter 1's regions: the rust-stained halls, the despoiled capital, and the fetid tomb, along with the monsters you face in them. But I have not talked about the 4th, and that is because it's a rather special area, in that it is the only area of Chapter 1 that is totally untouched by Kynox's taint. Dead Breath, a massive, ancient holy site deep under the fetid tomb that was used by the capital's ancestors to consecrate, bury, and spirit away the dead. It has been abandoned by humanity long ago, but is still populated by constructs, untainted spirits, and other death-aligned entities. The region's name comes from the practice of taking and storing the last breath of the dying as a medium to animate statues and the like, as well as for other rituals. The sketch you've been seeing is a concept for a wolf statue that, when in close proximity, either blows out mystic breath or sucks in the player's breath, which I haven't decided. Maybe both? I don't know. These statue hazards, as I'm calling them, will be prevalent in Dead Breath, and what other forms they could take is one I'm quite excited for. Staying in Dead Breath, here is a reimagined enemy called the Risen Grave, whose only difference is that the headstone is changed to fit the new style of the Divine Death worshippers, along with a second type of headstone, as them all being just one is simply too repetitive. Also, the worms wriggling and plopping out from underneath are gone in the remake, as that would qualify as decay, which the practitioners of Divine Death are against. Next to them is a rough sketch of how these graves are, well, risen, and that is via the spell of an imp, a rather devilish-looking creature which certainly looks pure evil, but is more mischievous than anything. It is aligned with death, and so was employed by the capital's ancestors to watch over cemeteries, and in return being fed lingering wisps of rot which often hang around gravesites, passively spreading decay to the buried dead. Now, each of the gods has an emissary, a highly sacred being created directly by the god to act out its wishes with undying loyalty. Additionally, each god stays in the chapter they preside over, never spreading their influence beyond their conquered borders. But what if that wasn't the case? Meet the emissary for the god of Chapter 6, Halak, the grandly titled Father of Depravity, whose unblinking gaze sparks nightmares to any who see them. Invading the capital's castle, the emissary ventures through its halls and kills anything in its way, clearly looking for something that Halak may want. It bears the similar bulging, lidless eyes of its god, the messy beard which wraps around its torso, along with stilt-like legs that end in sharp points, piercing the ground and seemingly wounding it. Its steps leaving a trail of festering scarlet mass. The emissary proves itself to be a formidable adversary, hosting the distinct profane magic of Halak with lethal proficiency, along with being incapable of being slain by the player's weapons. The only way to fell it is with a pure ray of holy light, held as a spear, which the player thrusts into its chest, violently exploding and killing the emissary in a brutal, bloody fashion. But, as the player's back is to its corpse, they feel the unmistakable sensation of eyes peering at the back of their head. Whipping around, the emissary's head is raised over, facing them, and even though the blast popped its eyes out of its skull, two unblinking eyes rest within the darkness of its hollow skull. The eyes vanish like apparitions, and the head falls back to the floor. Halak's emissary is dead, and surely its god's wrath will not be far behind. Well, that wraps it up for the first tour of my digital sketchbook. There's so much more to come for Dungeon of the One revamp, but for now I will put it to the side and write up ideas for it while I dedicate the next entries to my other worlds, the next 4 of which are very recent at the time of this recording, and I am excited to get to talk about them. I hope this was an interesting listen for you, and I hope you will stick around and look forward to the next sketchbook tour. Until then, close this dusty tome and return another time, for your eyes will need rest for what is to come.